Hey everyone, my name is David C. Hayes, and I am going to be reading to you a story from my collection, The Midnight Creature Feature Picture Show. It's a vampire story. There is some swearing involved, so if that's not your proclivities. Please tune off. There is no I'm not going to tell you that. They may be kind of a spoiler. So, again, my name is David Hayes. This is from the Midnight Creature Feature Picture Show, and that's available on Amazon, or you can go to my website, davidchayes.com, and pick it up. It's from Dragon's Roost Press. Let's do this. The story is called Hack. The Yuck Yuck Hut on Clark Street in downtown Chicago was dark as pitch when Jeff, El Jefe Dolniak, entered the front doors. It was long after hours at the upscale comedy club, but Jeff didn't know that anything, anywhere, could be this dark. This joint is Africa dark, he thought, and, contrary to standard operating procedure, he was too freaked out to laugh at his own joke. He cleared his throat quietly. There was no response. For a guy that routinely performed in front of hundreds of laughing fans, and whose material is a couple of steps left of just plain wrong, the quiet and the darkness and the creepiness had really thrown him off. It was worth it, though. At least El Jefe thought it was worth it, even if he couldn't exactly explain what it was. Gathering all of his courage, mid-level comedian Jeff Dolniak called out bravely into the darkness. Hello? He said. It's me, Jeff. Nothing. Wait. Mr. Dolniak, it is a pleasure to see you. Sliced through the darkness, the words oily and black. The spotlight blazed from the rear of the club, lighting up the stage next to Jeff. El Jefe jumped, his heart in his throat. The round spotlight exposed the small stage and stool and microphone. This wasn't Jeff's first time in the club, and he knew that a house that seated around 200 fell off into the darkness beyond the light. The Yuck Yuck Hut had been a Chicago institution since before World War II. You get to play there, and you are up for a major tour. That's just how it works. Well, Jeff knew how it worked for real. At least he thought he did. That was why he was there, scared half to death. A heartbeat behind the light, Kyle Dillon, the club manager, moved into the cast-off glow of the spot. He smiled, like always, and extended his hand. Jeff had never seen Dillon without that smile. It unnerved every comedian that played the Hut, and Jeff had always assumed it was a negotiating tactic. Tactic or not, it effectively made any situation awkward. Jeff tentatively took Dillon's hand in a perfunctory shake and moved his hand quickly away. The smile never wavered. I'm glad you took Mr. Timponi up on his offer. He sees a great deal in you, Mr. Dolniak. A great deal indeed. Thank you. Thank Mr. Timponi for me. If possible, Jeff thought that Dillon's smile grew wider and whiter. Oh, you'll be able to thank him yourself. Follow me to the dressing area. You'll have approximately 15 minutes to prepare, and then you will perform. With that, Dillon turned and disappeared into the murky shadows of the club. Stumbling after him, Jeff tried to keep up. He'd played the club before, during business hours, of course, when the lights were on, so he managed not to kill himself as Dillon walked around tables toward the rear of the establishment. They eventually reached the dressing area, and Dillon held the door for Jeff. Please, Mr. Dolniak, enter. Jeff, managing a weak smile, entered the small dressing room. A bottle of bourbon, his favorite kind, a tumbler, and ice were already there. Jeff felt a little more relaxed seeing his best friend on the table like that. Well, one of his best friends. Like most comedians worth his salt, Jeff ran with Jim, Jack, Johnny, and Jose pretty regularly. Too regularly, if you asked his 3 ex-wives. So it will be just Mr. Timponi? Jeff asked. He stammered a bit, saying the man's name now that he knew the truth. And myself? Here are the ground rules. You are to tell 3 jokes. These are not to be slice-of-life pastiches where you wax poetic and make humorous observances about the bizarre, uniquely American condition. You will tell 3 jokes that have a setup, a body, and a punchline. Do you understand? Yes, Jeff answered. I guess, but why can't I just do my set that Mr. Timponi is a purist, and he believes that any individual able to tell a joke will be able to enthrall an audience with a story. It is the joke, though, the bare essence of comedy, that is so difficult. Dylan's smile, as always, never wavered, even as he cut off and chastised Jeff. I understand. In addition, you are not to curse or use profane language. Mr. Timponi believes that is evidence of a weak mind. You do not want Mr. Timponi to believe you have a weak mind, do you? No. Good. You will have 3 attempts to make Mr. Timponi laugh. 3 jokes. 3 attempts. If you succeed in that endeavor, he will see to it that you, Mr. Dolniak, will have a long and illustrious career as long as you see fit to stay alive. If you do not, well, you're aware of the consequences. I'll leave you to it. Dylan exited, shutting the door behind him. Jeff exhaled deeply. He hoped it was worth it. At least he looked into the mirror, ringed with small lights, and stared into the eyes of a good, unknown comedian that knew his last shot at something, anything, of value in the industry was right here and now. If he didn't make it tonight, though, shit. He didn't even want to think about it. Not many people get this opportunity. At least he didn't think many people did. It's not like you'd hear from the guys that blew it. Jeff opened the bourbon and filled the glass. He ignored the ice and took a long guzzle, letting it burn down his throat. He shivered with the smoothness of the drink and took a deep breath. He was really going to do it. Tony Timponi's challenge. A couple of years ago, he would have laughed off anyone that brought it up, but Jeff knew now. He knew that Tony Timponi was the real fucking deal. Tony Timponi was the original and only owner of the Yuck Yuck Hut, established in 1941. If he had bought the joint at 18, that would make him 90 years old or so, or something right now. And after glimpsing Mr. Timponi, Jeff could see that the guy was nowhere near 90. He didn't appear often, although legend has it that Mr. Timponi has seen every comedian that has ever played the Hut. But when he did, he looked 35, 40 years old. People have always said that it's a big Timponi family joke. The sons and the grandsons just keep taking the place and playing Mr. Timponi like some cryptic Andy Kaufman rib. But that wasn't it. Tony Timponi was really the same guy, and with the advent of the internet, it was pretty easy to figure out a timeline. After Dylan approached Jeff after one of the shows last week and made the offer, the one that comedians talk about very quietly over drinks or Coke or whatever, Jeff did a little research. Any vaudeville historian worth their salt would tell you that that the Hut hit its heyday in the I'm going to go back here. Any vaudeville historian worth their salt would tell you that it hit its heyday in the 1920s. But the polite company variety shows really came into vogue in the late 1800s. Gentlemen song and dance men, zany comedians, and screwball clownish performances were the hallmark of the vaudeville revue. Most of the shows traveled on a circuit, going from town to town, city to city, like modern medieval minstrels. In the early days of vaudeville, running the Midwest territory, there was one name that drew them all in, the men and women, kids and adults. That was Top Hat Tony Timponi, and he was considered the funniest man in Chicago and surrounding areas. Most people who read that on a poster may have disregarded it as some kind of clever advertising. Barnum-esque publicity, maybe. Anyone who'd seen a Top Hat show knew better. Chances were their sides still hurt from the last time Tony was in town. Tony played out to sold-out crowds from Elgin to Detroit, Minnetonka to Des Moines, and everywhere in between. He had even started to branch out to the East Coast in the mid-1920s, and with that expansion, got a serious look from Hollywood studios. Top Hat's patented brand of polite, family-friendly comedy featured some physical work that would put some of the Hollyweird bigwigs, Buster and Charlie watch out, to shame. His calling card, though, was the joke. He could set it up, make them wait for it, and then knock it out of the park like no one else. The funny man had a rocket strapped to his back, and he was headed straight to the top until 1929. After that, he disappeared. Just like that. Poof. The dates were canceled, and a replacement act was quickly booked to fill the empty slot, and the name Top Hat Tony Timponi slowly faded until it was nothing more than a name that fellow comedians would raise a glass to, toasting his genius, as they stole the jokes that Tony obviously had no more use for. Anthony Timponi, the name, appeared on the requisite documents in the late 1930s to open the Yuck Yuck Hut, and it had been there ever since. It was a Chicago institution, along with the Blues and Second City. From the onset, the hut managed to become a proving ground for young comedians. Anyone that was anyone had played the hut at some point, and through the years, it became a destination point for comedians and audiences alike. It wasn't until the 1960s, though, that the whisper started. The little stories told in the dark about Tony Timponi, the hut, and just how hard it was to make it in this business. Jeff had heard the talk before. Tony Timponi would make the offer of a game to a certain comedians that he felt had merit. If they agreed, those comedians would be in the same place that Jeff was right now. Each of them was given 3 chances to make a genuine comedy legend laugh. If you succeed, the sky's the limit. Although no one ever knew for sure, there had been talk regarding just who benefited from the Timponi touch. Dangerfield, Kinnison, imagine him telling a clean joke, Carlin, all of them genius performers, and each of them a certifiable success, artistically and financially. They would never indicate whether or not Tony had a hand in their success. No one would. But one can wonder, right? And those unlucky stiffs that didn't make the big man laugh, no one ever heard of them again. The funny part was that no one heard of them to begin with, so it wasn't like there was a big void in the comedy world by their absence. Another slot just opened up at open mic. It was as simple as that. Jeff slugged down another drink and refilled the glass. He had to will himself to not suck that one dry right away. It would do no good up there. To go up there sloshed. That's a quick trip to Deadsville. Jeff laughed. It was that other rumor about Top Hat Tony Timponi that really disturbed him, especially after his research. When a comedian is doing poorly and the audience is just crickets out there, the performers call them dead. Jeff laughed again. He was pretty sure that this audience tonight was already dead. Well, undead, technically. All the whispering and all the talk about just who Tony Timponi was usually skirted around really what everyone thought. Only very late at night, when the bartender gives you an extra couple hours after last call while the staff cleans up, did anyone dare say what everyone already thought. Vampire. There it was, out in the world. Jeff had thought the word and could no longer bring it back. If you didn't get Mr. Timponi to laugh, then you became lunch. Dylan did not say that verbatim. He did indicate that if Jeff lost, he should make sure that all his affairs were in order before coming to the Yuck Yuck Hut. Walking through those doors was acceptance of the terms. Why did Top Hat do this? No one knew. Boredom, maybe? Jeff liked to think that Top Hat was concerned with the quality of the industry. Tony had been around so long he could see all the bumbling oafs come through over the years. The guys that told dirty nursery rhymes or simply smashed watermelons or celebrated the blueness of their collars. The lowest common denominator of comedy had to anger Tony. He was a master, a classic. He had a PhD in funny, and these hacks only managed to tell toilet jokes. That's what Jeff wanted to believe. He was chosen. He had something that Timponi saw, and by God, he was going to give it his best shot. Comedy was his life, literally now that Colleen had left, and he wanted this more than anything else. There was no plan B, like a college degree or a factory job back home. Failure meant death, so, in effect, he had nothing to lose. It was still scary as shit, though, and he still hadn't thought through his 3 jokes when there was a knock at the door. Mr. Dolniak? Dylan asked through the door. Yep, Jeff answered, surprised you could even squeak that out. The door opened and the club manager had the same smile plastered across his face. You're on. Dylan didn't wait for an answer. He turned and walked toward the front of the club. Taking a deep breath, Jeff shot back the last of the bourbon and followed. Dylan sidestepped to the left as they entered the main show area. Jeff trudged forward through the murkiness and aimed right for that spotlight in that stage. He took the steps one by one and felt the weight of the world on each of them. It was all he could do to pull himself up the short flight. Once on stage, he moved through the molasses, getting to the microphone, adjusted it to his height, and cleared his throat. The mic was on, and his gurgling phlegm echoed throughout the empty club. Oh, Jesus, he said, hearing his bodily fluids all around him. The exclamation was too loud as well. Jeff stood back from the mic quickly and took a deep breath. Dylan's voice slid through the club to the stage. Calm down, Mr. Dolniak. Jeff nodded and took a couple of deep breaths. He made a mental conviction, plastered his comedy smile on, and stepped up to the mic one more time. Good evening, everyone. Well, you, Mr. Timponi. My name is Jeff Dolniak, and he knows that, Mr. Dolniak. Tell your first joke. Jeff responded by giving in and shutting up. Jesus Christ, he thought. Haven't even said hello and I'm getting heckled. Oh, this business is murder. At the thought, Jeff cracked a smile. At least he could get himself to laugh. His mind working a mile a minute, Jeff started the first joke that came to him. Johnny and his wife had fallen on some tough times in this economy. You know what I mean? Johnny can't find a job, his wife can't find a job, but she is quite attractive. So they concoct this plan where his wife, Evie, would take to the streets. She became a prostitute and Johnny would play her pimp. They watched a bunch of movies like Pretty Woman to make sure they were getting everything right. So Johnny sends his wife out on the first night and she comes back smiling from ear to ear. She has had a great night, she tells her husband, and she hands over the loot. It's $102.57. And Johnny can't believe it. Over $100. He was curious, though, and asked her, "Who gave you 57 cents? His wife smiled and said, "Everybody." Jeff stepped back, waiting. He waited a moment more. Nothing. No chuckle. No laugh. Not even a derisive snort. Fuck, he thought. Jeff gave Mr. Timponi another moment. Wait for it. Wait for it. Mr. Dolniak, Dylan shattered the quiet. You may try again. One down. Jeff's mind raced. He needed something. Maybe Timponi didn't like the hooker thing. Maybe he was too old. Jeff sweated bullets and licked his lips. They were beginning to dry and crack. His mouth felt like it was filled with cotton. Dead room, that's for sure, he thought, and laughed out loud this time. I slay me, he thought again, and laughed one more time. Not even the image of Tony Timponi swooping in from the rafters, fangs bared, eyes blazing, could spoil it. Mr. Dolniak? I'm good. I'm fine. I'm ready, Jeff said between chuckles. He stepped up to the mic again and took a deep breath. Jokes. He wants jokes. I'll give him jokes. He went for broke. You know, Jeff started, ever since I've been a little kid, I've been fascinated with prison. No, seriously, I have. What it takes to get there, what you have to do in prison. I mean, I must admit, I had been a bit infatuated with the idea that there was free food, free cable, and you got to have a roommate. As an only child, I dug the roommate thing. The particular fringe benefit took on a new meaning as I got older, as did the whole prison thing. I realized that you had what you had to do in order to go to prison. And I also realized what people did to you when you were in prison, if you know what I mean. So I developed a plan. I always thought I would end up there, but I saw how these inmates, these common criminals, were approaching the incarcerated thing all wrong. They worked out and got big and buff so they could beat up any gang rapist that came by, right? Not me. I'm going to eat. I'm going to eat and eat and eat. And as you can already tell, my derriere is a little larger than most. It's plump. Imagine that even bigger. Much bigger. There's a show on TV called 600-Pound Virgin. That guy's rear end is smaller than I'm thinking. When all the other tough guys are fighting off the rapists, I'm just going to let them in. Go right ahead. With an ass that big, you'll just be playing in the cheeks anyway. You need to be hung like John Holmes to hit my sweet meat. This joke always worked. He had told it across the country. Even Republicans in Kansas were at least ashamed to laugh at this one. It poked fun at all of society's pariahs. Fat people, convicts, rapists, comedians, everyone. Jeff waited for that chuckle. Even a 100-year-old douchebag that had heard every joke on the planet had to laugh at that one, didn't he? Another moment. Nothing. Jeff threw his hands up in exasperation. He couldn't take it. He was going to die, and there was no way out. Screw it. One more time, Mr. Dole. Shut up, Jeff cut Dylan off, knowing full well that he was probably signing his own death warrant. Just shut up. Yeah, I got it. One more joke. Whatever. I don't need some Renfield wannabe with a goofy smile telling me I'm a 2/3 dead, okay? Jeff squinted in the spotlight, trying to make out a shape, anything in the audience. And you, Top Hat? Yeah, I know about you. Everyone does. They just won't talk about it. You're some kind of comedy godfather, right? Lives forever, feeds on comics. They don't cut it. I get it. You're probably looking up here like, I'm lunch. Well, too bad for me, right? He stood back. He kicked the stool over in frustration and ripped the mic from the mic stand. Goddamn vampire, they said. Can't trust him, they said. I'm not talking about you. I'm talking about every other goddamn comedy promoter and club owner on the planet. You Nosfer... Fuck you. You're the only honest one. You admit it. Know what I hope? I hope all the goddamn villagers get their goddamn torches and they come down here. I don't want them to kill you, though. I want them to tie you down to a chair and put a fucking TV in front of you, and you won't be able to move, and I want them to play all of the fucking Twilight movies in a row, over and over again, until you decide to kill yourself. By my estimation, it should be about 20 minutes into the first one. Mr. Doniak, Dylan shouted from the audience. Can it? Go eat a fly or something. I'm almost done anyway. Finally, I just want to thank you for the opportunity and warn you that I am a borderline alcoholic, so what I got in these veins may be a little watered down for your tastes. Anyway, have at it. Jeff laughed then, long and hard. He knew the end was near, so he righted the stool, took a deep breath, and sat down. The spotlight shut off at that point, throwing the club into complete darkness. Before he could even blink and start the eye adjustment process, Jeff felt a presence behind him. It was cold and dark. Hands grasped Jeff's shoulders and he went rigid. The hands had long fingers that were almost gentle at the touch, like when humans test a piece of fruit for freshness. Jeff could barely feel their weight, but he knew they were there. He knew their intent as well. A cold, dry tongue tasted the vein at the top of Jeff's neck. The sound of the tongue scraping against his 5 o'clock shadow was like Velcro separating, and it made Jeff shiver. He pulled the microphone up one last time. They told me that comedy was filled with a bunch of bloodsuckers, and that I'd never make it. Guess they were right after all. Jeff let the mic drop to the floor. It landed with a thunk that reverberated through the speaker system. Jeff closed his eyes, preparing for the end. Wait for it. Wait for it. The hands left his shoulders and the room warmed up a bit just then. And, from the shadows, Jeff heard the most awful sound on the planet, like nails on a chalkboard underwater. It was music to his ears. And that's it. That was Hack by me. My name is David Hayes in the Midnight Creature Feature Picture Show. Feel free to pick this up at your leisure, anywhere you feel like it. I hope you enjoyed it. Keep telling those jokes.